Cruel millionaire marries a simple woman as a joke, only to find out she's an heiress in disguise. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving only shadows and the promise of destruction. Logan had no idea that somewhere in Birmingham, Alabama, a soft-spoken nurse's aide named Tessa Brooks was getting ready for the same gala, and that she was about to teach him the difference between being rich and being powerful. Have you ever witnessed someone make a bet that destroyed lives? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The bet was simple. Marry the next nobody he met and prove love was just another commodity, until the day his nobody walked away with everything he owned. Logan Pierce stood on the marble balcony of the Palm Beach Country Club, swirling his third glass of bourbon as Florida's golden sunset painted the sky blood red. Below him, perfectly manicured lawns stretched toward the ocean, where his yacht bobbed like a white diamond against the waves. Everything he touched turned to gold. Everything he wanted he took. And right now, he wanted to prove a point. "You're all soft," Logan said, turning back to his circle of billionaire friends lounging in leather chairs worth more than most people's cars. Love, marriage, commitment. It's all just business dressed up in pretty lies. Marcus Wellington, old money from Boston, laughed and loosened his silk tie. Easy word from a man who's never been married. "Because I'm not stupid enough to fall for the con," Logan shot back. His dark eyes held the cold calculation that had built his investment empire from nothing. "Give me any woman, any ordinary, grateful nobody, and I'll have her eating out of my palm in 2 weeks. Married and wrapped around my finger in a month." The group exchanged glances. These men had known Logan since his Harvard days, watched him climb from scholarship kid to Wall Street wolf. They'd seen him destroy companies before breakfast and seduce senators' wives by dinner. But this felt different. Darker. "Prove it," said Richard Blackstone, leaning forward with the predatory smile that had earned him $3 billion in tech deals. "Next woman you meet. No choosing, no backing out. Marry her, keep her for a year, and document the whole thing." Logan's pulse quickened. The challenge sang in his veins like cocaine. "What's the prize?" $50 million. Winner takes all. Richard's eyes glittered. "But you have to break her completely. Not just marry her, destroy her dignity, her self-worth, everything that makes her think she's special. Prove that love is just advanced manipulation." The other men nodded, excitement crackling between them like electricity before a storm. They were bored gods looking for entertainment, and Logan was their gladiator. "And when I win?" Logan drained his bourbon, savoring the burn. "When you win, you'll have proven what we all know. There's no such thing as unconditional love. Just varying prices for dignity." Logan extended his hand, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Deal." As they shook hands, sealing the cruelest wager ever made among America's elite, Logan's phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. "Manhattan Charity Gala tonight. Your presence requested." He smiled coldly, already calculating. Charity events were hunting grounds for the kind of grateful, innocent women who still believed in fairy tales. Women who would see his wealth and power as salvation instead of the trap it really was. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving only shadows and the promise of destruction. Logan had no idea that somewhere in Birmingham, Alabama, a soft-spoken nurse's aide named Tessa Brooks was getting ready for the same gala, and that she was about to teach him the difference between being rich and being powerful. Have you ever witnessed someone make a bet that destroyed lives? What's the cruelest wager you've ever heard of? Drop your thoughts below. As Logan headed to his helicopter, already planning his victim's downfall, none of them could have predicted that in exactly 1 year, he'd be the one begging for mercy. The game was about to begin, but the rules were about to change in ways that would leave them all gasping. She walked into the Manhattan ballroom in a borrowed dress and thrift store shoes, having no idea she was about to become the prey in a billionaire's twisted game. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom glowed like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across marble floors where New York's elite mingled in designer gowns and $1,000 suits. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money, thick with the kind of privilege that could suffocate dreams. Tessa Brooks smoothed her borrowed black dress, a simple cotton number her roommate had found at a consignment shop, and tried not to feel like an imposter among the silk and diamonds. She was here as a volunteer coordinator for the Children's Cancer Foundation, not as a guest, but the distinction felt razor-sharp in a room where her entire monthly salary wouldn't buy a single earring. Her soft Alabama accent drew curious glances as she directed catering staff and ensured the auction items were properly displayed. "Y'all need anything else for the silent auction table?" she asked a harried waiter, who barely paused to shake his head before rushing away with champagne flutes that cost more than her rent. From across the room, Logan Pierce watched her like a predator studying prey. She moved with unconscious grace, her honey-colored hair pulled back in a simple bun that revealed the elegant line of her neck. No designer clothes, no flash of jewelry, no desperate hunger for attention that marked most women in his world. She was helping others, focusing on her work, completely unaware that she was the most beautiful woman in the room. Perfect, Logan thought, his pulse quickening with anticipation. She was exactly what he needed, humble, grateful, innocent. The kind of woman who would see his wealth as a miracle instead of recognizing the devil's bargain it really was. He made his move during the cocktail hour, timing his approach as she carried champagne flutes to the auction table. The collision was perfectly orchestrated, his shoulder bumping hers just hard enough to send the golden liquid cascading down his custom Italian shirt. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Tessa's eyes went wide with horror, her hands fluttering helplessly as she stared at the spreading stain across his chest. "I've ruined your beautiful shirt." Any other man would have been furious. Logan smiled, letting his gaze travel slowly from her flushed cheeks to her worried brown eyes. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice dropping to the warm, intimate tone that had seduced countless women. "I have a feeling you're going to make it up to me." She blushed deeper, her southern manners making her bob her head apologetically. "Please, let me get you some club soda, or—" "What's your name?" he interrupted, stepping closer until she caught the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the champagne. Tessa Brooks." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit that made her seem even younger. "I work for the foundation. I coordinate volunteers, and you're not from New York." It wasn't a question. Her accent was soft magnolia and sweet tea, completely out of place among the sharp consonants of Manhattan power players. "Birmingham, Alabama," she admitted, as if her hometown was something to apologize for. "I moved here 2 years ago for work." Logan filed away every detail, already building the profile he'd used to destroy her. Small-town girl, probably struggling financially, definitely overwhelmed by his world. She'd be grateful for his attention, eager to please, easy to manipulate. What kind of work brings someone from Alabama to New York? He handed her his champagne glass, a casual gesture that forced her to look up at him. "I'm a nurse's aide at Mount Sinai. I help families navigate the system when their children are in treatment." Her voice softened with genuine care. Sometimes they just need someone to explain what the doctors are saying, or help them find resources they didn't know existed. Something flickered in Logan's chest, an emotion he quickly crushed. She wasn't just beautiful, she was good. Actually genuinely good, in a way that his world had beaten out of him years ago. The contrast made his plan feel both easier and somehow more necessary. "That's beautiful work," he said, meaning it despite himself. "I'm Logan Pierce." Recognition flickered in her eyes, not starstruck but aware. She'd heard his name, knew his reputation, but she wasn't throwing herself at him like most women did. "The investment firm owner," she said quietly. "You've donated a lot to the foundation. Money's easy to give when you have enough of it." He moved closer, letting his fingers brush hers as he took back his champagne glass. What's harder to find is someone who actually cares about making a difference. The compliment hit its target. Tessa's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire ballroom. Pure and radiant and completely unguarded. In that moment, Logan saw exactly how easy this was going to be. Have you ever felt completely out of place at a fancy event? How did you handle being the outsider? Share your experience. Would you like to get some air? He asked, already knowing her answer from the way her breathing had quickened. The balcony has an incredible view of Central Park. She nodded, letting him guide her through the crowd with his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. As they walked, Logan caught sight of Marcus Wellington across the room, raising his champagne glass in a subtle toast. The bet was officially in motion. What Logan didn't know was that as they stepped onto the moonlit balcony, Tessa was fighting her own internal battle. She'd researched every major donor to the foundation, including the ruthless businessman now looking at her like she was the answer to prayers she'd never thought to pray. When she accidentally spilled wine on his $1,000 shirt, her horrified apology made him smile for the first time in years. "Don't worry about it," he said, already planning her destruction. "I have a feeling you're going to make it up to me." But as Manhattan glittered below them and her soft laughter mixed with the night air, neither of them realized that some games have a way of changing the players more than the stakes. He courted her like a fairy tale prince while his friends watched from the shadows, betting on how long it would take to break an angel's wings. Logan Pierce had perfected the art of seduction the same way he'd mastered corporate takeovers, with ruthless precision, overwhelming force, and an instinct for exactly where to apply pressure. Over the next 2 weeks, he deployed every weapon in his arsenal against Tessa Brooks, and watched her defenses crumble like sandcastles before a tsunami. The morning after the gala, 36 white roses arrived at her tiny studio apartment in Queens with a note written in his bold handwriting. "Thank you for making charity work look so beautiful. Ed." Tessa stared at the flowers crowding her cramped kitchen, their perfection almost violent against her secondhand furniture and peeling paint. Her phone rang before she could fully process the gesture. "Did you get my flowers?" Logan's voice was warm honey over gravel, intimate despite the distance between his Manhattan penthouse and her Queens walk-up. They're incredible," she stammered, still in her scrubs from the night shift at Mount Sinai. "But you didn't have to. I wanted to. Have dinner with me tonight." It wasn't really a question. Logan had learned long ago that confidence was more seductive than politeness, and Tessa responded exactly as he predicted, with breathless gratitude that made his chest tighten in ways he refused to examine. "I don't know if I have anything appropriate to wear," she admitted, and he could picture her looking down at her simple cotton dress, comparing it to the designer gown she'd seen at the gala. "Leave that to me." The personal shopper arrived at Tessa's apartment 2 hours later with garment bags from Bergdorf Goodman, followed by a hairstylist and makeup artist who transformed her from exhausted night shift worker to something that belonged on magazine covers. Logan watched from his office as the charges appeared on his credit card. $15,000 for a single outfit, more money than she made in 2 months. Pocket change for him, life-changing generosity for her. The perfect trap. That evening, his private driver collected her in the Bentley, and Logan met her at Luke Bernardine with the kind of smile that had graced magazine covers and broken hearts across 3 continents. She looked incredible in the midnight blue dress that hugged every curve, her hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders, but it was her expression that nearly derailed his carefully laid plans. She looked at him like he was magic. "You look stunning," he said, meaning it despite himself as he kissed her hand in greeting. Her skin was soft and warm, and she smelled like vanilla and something uniquely her, not the heavy designer perfumes he was used to. "I feel like Cinderella," she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. "This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen." Logan had eaten here hundreds of times, but watching Tessa discover, it was like seeing it through new eyes. She marveled at the artistic presentation of each course, asked thoughtful questions about the wine pairings, and listened with genuine fascination as he told carefully edited stories about his business empire. "You built all this from nothing?" she asked over dessert, her voice filled with admiration that sent unexpected warmth through his chest. "My father was a construction worker in Chicago," Logan said, the truth slipping out easier than the lies he'd planned. "My mother cleaned houses to pay for my school clothes. I swore I'd never be poor again." Tessa reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, the simple gesture more intimate than anything he'd experienced with women who'd shared his bed. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished." Not everyone could do what you've done. The sincerity in her voice should have made his victory feel sweeter. Instead, it made something twist uncomfortably in his stomach. She wasn't just falling for his act. She was seeing something in him that he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Over the next 10 days, Logan overwhelmed her with experiences designed to make her dependent on the lifestyle only he could provide. Private jet to Napa Valley for wine tasting. Shopping trips where he bought her everything she admired. Broadway shows in box seats that cost more than her annual salary. Each experience was calculated to show her what her life could be, if only she surrendered completely to his will. But something unexpected began happening in the quiet moments between his grand gestures. Walking through Central Park, her hand in his, talking about her patients and their families. Late dinners at small restaurants where she insisted on splitting the check, arguing that equality mattered more than money. Slow kisses on her apartment fire escape while Brooklyn sparkled below them, her lips soft and giving under his. "I've never felt like this before," she admitted on their second week together, her head resting on his chest in his penthouse bedroom after they'd made love with an intensity that left him shaken. "I didn't know I could feel like this." Logan stared at the ceiling, her breathing soft against his skin, and tried to ignore the way his chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to tenderness. This was just the bet, just business, just proving that every woman had a price, and hers was simply higher than most. But as she traced lazy patterns across his chest with her fingertip, humming softly in the darkness, he found himself wondering what would happen if he told her the truth. If he called off the bet, admitted what he'd planned, asked for forgiveness instead of surrender. The thought terrified him more than any boardroom battle ever had. When someone showers you with expensive gifts early in dating, is it romantic or a red flag? What's your experience with too much too fast relationships? His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Richard Blackstone. "How's our little experiment coming along?" Followed by a laughing emoji that made Logan's jaw clench. Tessa stirred in his arms, her lips brushing against his collarbone as she settled deeper into sleep. She trusted him completely, gave herself to him without reservation, believed in the fairy tale he'd constructed around her. In the morning, he would take the next step. The proposal was already planned, the ring already chosen, the media contacts already arranged. America would watch Cinderella get her prince, and Logan would prove once and for all that love was just another commodity to be bought and sold. As she fell asleep in his arms after their most intimate evening yet, Logan stared at her peaceful face and felt something crack inside his chest. The bet suddenly felt less like victory and more like damnation. But it was too late to turn back now. The game was in motion, and Logan Pierce had never lost a game in his life. He just hadn't counted on the cost of winning. America watched him propose to Cinderella on live television. What they didn't see was the contract she signed, making her a prisoner in a golden cage. Times Square pulsed with its usual chaos. Tourists snapping photos, street performers competing for attention, massive digital billboards painting the night in electric colors. But tonight, the energy felt different. Charged. Expectant. Logan had bought out the entire Jumbotron display for what he'd told Tessa was a small surprise, and the crowd below sensed something spectacular was about to happen. "Logan, what are we doing here?" Tessa laughed nervously, her hand tight in his as he led her through the cordoned-off area his security team had established. She wore the ivory silk dress he'd chosen, designer perfection that flowed around her curves like liquid starlight, but her eyes held the same wonder they'd carried since that night at the plaza. 3 weeks. That's all it had taken to completely rewrite her understanding of what life could be. 3 weeks of private jets and 5-star restaurants, of being treated like she was precious instead of expendable, of falling so hard for Logan Pierce that breathing felt difficult when he wasn't near. "Trust me," he said, his voice carrying that intimate warmth that made her stomach flutter. "Have I ever steered you wrong?" Before she could answer, the massive screens above them flickered to life with their image. Tessa in his arms at the charity gala, laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The crowd below erupted in excited murmurs as more images flashed by. Their wine country weekend, dancing on his yacht deck, sharing ice cream in Central Park like teenagers instead of a billionaire and his carefully chosen victim. Logan, Tessa's voice was barely audible over the growing crowd noise. Her free hand pressed against her chest, where her heart was hammering against her ribs. The final image filled every screen. A close-up of them kissing on his penthouse balcony, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind them like fallen stars. Below the photo, words appeared in golden script. "When you find your forever, why wait?" Logan dropped to one knee right there on the red carpet, pulling out a ring box that caught the flashing lights and threw them back in brilliant rainbows. The crowd's roar was deafening, phones held high to capture every moment as America's most ruthless businessman knelt before a nurse's aide from Alabama. "Tessa Brooks," he said, his voice somehow carrying over the chaos. "3 weeks ago, you walked into my life and changed everything. You made me believe in something I thought was just a fairy tale." The ring was obscene in its perfection. A 10-carat diamond surrounded by sapphires that matched her eyes, worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. But Tessa was crying too hard to focus on the jewelry. Her hands pressed to her mouth as she stared down at the man she'd fallen hopelessly, completely in love with. "You're kind and beautiful and good in ways that make me want to be better," Logan continued, and the terrifying thing was how much he meant it. "Will you marry me?" The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for millions of viewers to hold their breath, before Tessa threw herself in his arms, sobbing yes against his neck while Times Square exploded in celebration around them. The ring slid on her finger with perfect precision, catching the light like captured fire. Logan lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as confetti cannons exploded overhead and the crowd chanted their approval. Every camera captured her radiant joy, his tender smile, the moment when America's prince claimed his princess. What the cameras didn't capture was the text Logan sent from the car afterward. "Phase 1 complete." She said yes. The response came immediately. "Congratulations. Ready for Phase 2. Logan looked at Tessa, still staring at her ring in wonder, tears of happiness streaming down her face. She believed completely in the fairy tale he'd constructed, trusted him with her whole heart, had no idea that she'd just agreed to participate in her own systematic destruction. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered, turning the ring so the diamonds caught the city lights streaming past their window. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back in my studio apartment, and none of this will have happened." "It's real," Logan said, kissing her temple with genuine tenderness that made his chest ache. "All of it." The prenuptial agreement was waiting at his apartment, 47 pages of legal language that would strip away every right she didn't know she was surrendering. His lawyers had crafted it carefully. Nothing that would hold up in court if she tried to fight it, but enough to make her feel trapped when the trap finally closed. "There's just some paperwork we need to handle," he said casually as they rode the elevator to his penthouse. "Legal stuff for the wedding. My lawyers insist on protecting both of us." Tessa nodded absently, still mesmerized by the ring that marked her as his. "Of course, whatever you think is best." The most dangerous clause was buried on page 34, written in language so dense that even lawyers would struggle to parse it quickly. Wife agrees to participate in all filming and documentation for publicity purposes related to their marriage and lifestyle, including but not limited to reality television programming, social media content, and promotional materials. She signed without reading it thoroughly, trusting him completely, while Logan died a little inside, watching her write her name next to his lawyer's carefully constructed trap. Every signature was another link in the chain that would bind her to his experiment, another step toward proving that love was just advanced manipulation. Would you want your proposal to go viral, or do you prefer intimate moments? What's your dream proposal scenario? The wedding is set for next month, Logan said after the contracts were signed and witnessed. "I hope that's not too fast." "It's perfect," Tessa said, curling against his side on his leather sofa, her engagement ring catching the light from his floor-to-ceiling windows. "I don't need time to plan some elaborate event. I just need you." Logan held her close, breathing in the vanilla scent of her hair, feeling the trust in the way she melted against him. In 4 weeks, she would walk down the aisle believing she was marrying the love of her life. The cameras would capture every moment of her joy, every tear of happiness, every promise she made in complete faith. The wedding was set for next month, but as Tessa read the prenup's fine print in her lawyer's office 3 days later, one clause made her blood run cold. Wife agrees to participate in all filming for documentary purposes. She was signing up to be entertainment, but by then, it would be too late to run. The golden cage was almost complete, and Logan Pierce had never been more certain that he was about to win the cruelest bet ever made. He just didn't realize that some cages lock from the inside, and the key to freedom might be in the hands of the woman he was planning to destroy. The honeymoon suite had cameras in every corner, and she realized too late that her new husband hadn't married a wife. He bought a performer for his twisted reality show. The wedding was everything little girls dream about, and everything nightmares are made of, though only one person in the cathedral knew which category it belonged to. St. Patrick's Cathedral gleamed with white roses and crystal, 500 guests in designer clothes filling pews that had witnessed a century of New York society marriages. Tessa walked down the aisle in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than her father's annual salary, her face glowing with joy behind antique lace that had belonged to Logan's grandmother, a touching detail he'd invented to make the story more compelling for their audience. She looked perfect, felt perfect, believed completely in the fairy tale unfolding around her as she placed her hand in Logan's and promised to love, honor, and cherish him for all the days of her life. When he slipped the platinum band onto her finger, his eyes held such convincing tenderness that for a moment, he almost believed in it himself. "You may kiss the bride." Logan lifted her veil with hands that shook slightly, and when their lips met, the kiss felt like a promise instead of a lie. The congregation erupted in applause, rice and rose petals filling the air as America's most ruthless businessman and his sweet Southern bride sealed their union. The reception was a masterpiece of elegance and excess. Champagne fountains, a 10-piece orchestra, dinner courses that read like poetry. Tessa danced with her new husband while photographers captured every smile, every laugh, every moment of her complete happiness. What she didn't notice were the small, nearly invisible cameras positioned throughout the ballroom. What she didn't understand was that every conversation, every private moment, every tear of joy was being recorded for an audience she didn't know existed. The honeymoon suite at the plaza continued the illusion perfectly. Silk sheets, champagne chilling in crystal buckets, rose petals scattered across marble floors that reflected the city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was romantic perfection, designed to make any bride feel like a princess. "Mrs. Pierce," Logan said softly, pulling her into his arms as the door closed behind them. The name sounded foreign on his lips, like a role he was still learning to play. "I can't believe we're married," Tessa whispered against his chest, her wedding dress rustling around her feet like captured moonlight. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's real," Logan murmured, meaning it more than he wanted to admit. His hands found the delicate buttons running down her spine, each one releasing another inch of silk and lace. All of it. They made love like newlyweds, tender and passionate, her soft cries of pleasure mixing with his deeper groans as they learned each other's bodies with the intimacy that only marriage allows. Logan lost himself in the feel of her skin against his, the way she said his name like a prayer, the complete trust in her eyes as she surrendered everything to him. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like desecration. Later, as Tessa slept curled against his side, Logan stared at the ceiling and tried to ignore the growing weight in his chest. She looked so peaceful, so completely trusting, her left hand resting on his chest where her new rings caught the city lights streaming through their windows. His phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. A text from Richard Blackstone. "Congratulations on the wedding. Ready to begin production." Logan's blood went cold. In his post-wedding haze, he'd almost forgotten about the cameras, the crew, the entire reality show apparatus that would transform their marriage into entertainment. Tomorrow, their real life would begin, and with it, the systematic destruction of the woman sleeping trustingly in his arms. He typed back, "Give us the weekend." The response was immediate. Crew arrives Monday morning. The network is very excited about the footage so far. Logan looked around the suite with new eyes, finally noticing what he'd been too distracted to see before. The smoke detector above their bed wasn't quite right, too large, positioned at an odd angle. The antique mirror on the dresser reflected light in a way that suggested a camera lens behind the silver. Even the champagne bucket held tiny recording devices disguised as ice cubes. Every moment of their wedding night had been captured. Every kiss, every whispered endearment, every intimate touch. All of it recorded for an audience that would tune in to watch America's Cinderella story play out in real time. Tessa stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name as she pressed closer to his warmth. Logan's arms tightened around her automatically, a protective gesture that felt more real than anything else in his carefully constructed world. Have you ever discovered someone was completely different after commitment? How did you handle that betrayal of trust? Monday morning arrived too soon, bringing with it a production crew that transformed their married life into a carefully orchestrated performance. The cameras were everywhere, hidden in flower arrangements, disguised as electronics, mounted in corners where they could capture every angle of their supposedly private moments. "What is all this?" Tessa asked, standing in their living room in her silk pajamas as technicians adjusted lighting and sound equipment around their breakfast table. "Documentation," Logan said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Remember the prenup? This is part of the publicity arrangement." Her face went pale as the implications hit her. "You mean people are going to watch us? In our home? In our private moments?" "Just the interesting parts," Logan said, forcing his voice to stay casual even as her expression crumbled. "Think of it as sharing our love story with the world." But Tessa was reading the fine print now, understanding too late what she'd agreed to in the golden haze of engagement bliss. She'd signed her privacy away, agreed to live her marriage in front of cameras, promised to perform her most intimate moments for public consumption. The fairy tale was about to become a nightmare, and Logan Pierce was the one holding the keys to her prison. On their third night, she found the betting contract in his desk drawer. $50 million to marry and humiliate any ordinary nobody for 12 months. Her hands shook as she read her own description. Perfect target, naive, grateful, easy to break. The golden cage had closed around her, and there was no way out except through 12 months of systematic humiliation designed to prove that love was just another lie rich men told to get what they wanted. But what Logan didn't know was that some cages work both ways, and the woman he'd married carried secrets that would make his $50 million bet look like pocket change. The game was just beginning, and Tessa Brooks Pierce was about to prove that the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you think you're winning. He dismantled her confidence piece by piece, turning every Southern charm into a source of shame, every kindness into weakness, while America watched and laughed along. The cameras had been rolling for 3 weeks when Logan Pierce truly began his masterpiece of cruelty. What started as subtle corrections became public humiliation, broadcast live to millions of viewers who tuned in every night to watch America's most ruthless businessman train his simple Southern wife. "Y'all want some sweet tea?" Tessa asked during their first filmed dinner party, her natural hospitality shining through the nervousness that had become her constant companion since the cameras invaded their home. Logan's laugh was sharp as broken glass, designed to cut deep while sounding playful to their audience. "Sweet tea, everyone. My wife still thinks we're in some backwoods Alabama trailer park." The dinner guests, carefully selected friends who understood their role in the performance, tittered with polite laughter. Tessa's face flushed red, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the crystal pitcher. "I just thought." "Don't think, darling," Logan interrupted, his voice carrying that patronizing tone that made millions of viewers cringe. "Let me handle the thinking." You just look pretty and try not to embarrass us. Each episode followed the same pattern. Logan would set Tessa up to fail, then publicly correct her mistakes with the patient condescension of a teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. Her accent became a source of daily mockery. Her small-town mannerisms were dissected and ridiculed. Her genuine kindness was twisted into evidence of stupidity. She said "fixin'" to during the charity board meeting. Logan told the camera during his private interview segments, shaking his head with manufactured disappointment. "I've spent thousands on etiquette coaches, speech therapists, the best trainers money can buy. But you can't polish granite into diamonds, you know?" The cruel metaphor became a hashtag. Hashtag polishing granite trended worldwide as viewers debated whether Logan was being too harsh or if Tessa really was as hopeless as she seemed. Fashion bloggers analyzed her outfits with surgical precision. Voice coaches posted videos breaking down her accent. Comedians built entire routines around her supposed stupidity. But the cameras also caught moments Logan didn't intend. Flashes of hurt in Tessa's eyes when she thought no one was watching. The way her shoulders sagged when he delivered another playful insult. How she flinched slightly whenever he raised his voice. Her family called constantly, their worried voices carrying across phone lines from Birmingham to Manhattan. "Baby, you don't sound like yourself," her mother said during one conversation that Logan made sure the cameras captured. "This man is changing you, and not in good ways." "Mama, he's just trying to help me fit in," Tessa replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "New York is different from home. I have to learn new ways." Learning new ways don't mean forgetting who you are. Logan watched from across the room, satisfied as Tessa's conversation grew more strained. Isolating her from her support system was crucial to breaking her completely. Every family call became an ordeal. Every attempt at reaching out to her old friends met with gentle discouragement that gradually became firmer control. The intimate moments were worst of all. Their bedroom had become a performance space where genuine affection was impossible to distinguish from strategic manipulation. Logan used sex as both reward and punishment, his touch becoming a tool for conditioning rather than connection. "You were perfect tonight," he would whisper after she'd successfully navigated one of his social tests, his hands gentle and loving as he worshipped her body with calculated precision. But when she failed, used the wrong fork, laughed too loudly, said something that revealed her working-class background, his touch turned cold, clinical. He would take his pleasure while making her feel like she was failing even at this most basic of wifely duties. "Try to keep up," he would say afterward, rolling away from her trembling body with dismissive satisfaction. "I know this is all new to you, but effort matters." The psychological warfare was relentless and expertly crafted. Logan had studied manipulation the way other men studied sports, learning exactly how to erode someone's self-worth while making them grateful for the attention. Every compliment came with conditions. Every gesture of affection required perfect performance. Social media exploded with opinions. Hashtag Team Logan supporters argued that he was helping his wife become better. Hashtag Save Tessa advocates called for intervention. The show's ratings climbed higher each week as America watched a woman's soul being systematically destroyed in primetime. "I just want to make you proud," Tessa said one night after a particularly brutal day of filming where Logan had corrected her pronunciation 17 times during a single dinner. "Then try harder," he replied, not looking up from his tablet where he was reviewing the daily footage with the producers. "I've given you everything: clothes, education, opportunities most women would kill for. The least you can do is show some improvement." Her reflection in their bathroom mirror showed the damage 3 months of marriage had inflicted. The bright spark in her eyes had dimmed. Her naturally warm smile had become hesitant, calculated. She learned to weigh every word before speaking, to consider how each gesture might be perceived and corrected. But late at night, when Logan slept beside her with the satisfied exhaustion of a predator who'd fed well, Tessa would lie awake staring at the ceiling. Something was growing inside her. Not love, not gratitude, but something harder and colder. Something that remembered who she'd been before she'd let herself become Logan Pierce's project. Have you ever been made to feel ashamed of your background or accent? How did you reclaim your pride? Share your story. The breaking point came during their 4th month of marriage, at a charity gala identical to the one where they'd met. Logan had spent the week preparing her, drilling her on proper conversation topics, acceptable She performed flawlessly. Every smile was perfectly calibrated, every word carefully chosen. She floated through the ballroom like the society wife Logan had tried to create, gracious and polished, and completely empty of the warmth that had first caught his attention. It should have been his greatest triumph. Instead, watching her interact with the other guests like a beautiful robot programmed for social success, Logan felt something that might have been regret. The night she overheard him laughing with producers about the hillbilly's pathetic gratitude, something shifted in her eyes. For the first time since childhood, Tessa remembered who she really was and what she was capable of. She stood in the bathroom afterward, staring at her reflection in the marble vanity that cost more than her childhood home. The woman looking back at her was exquisitely dressed, perfectly groomed, and completely unrecognizable. But beneath the surface, something ancient and powerful was stirring. Something that had been sleeping for so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Tessa Brooks had been broken as planned, but Teresa Beaumont was about to wake up, and when she did, Logan Pierce's carefully constructed world was going to burn. While Logan tormented his wife for entertainment, regulatory wolves circled his empire, and someone had been feeding them inside information for months. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other day in Logan Pierce's perfectly orchestrated life. He was reviewing the overnight footage from their apartment, noting with satisfaction how completely Tessa had retreated into herself during the previous evening's dinner party, when his assistant burst through his office doors without knocking. "Sir, we have a problem," Marcus said, his usually composed face pale with panic. "The SEC just froze 3 of our primary investment accounts." Logan looked up from his tablet, where Tessa's defeated expression filled the screen. "That's impossible. Our compliance department reviews everything. They have documentation going back 2 years. Insider trading allegations, market manipulation charges, violation of fiduciary duty." Marcus placed a thick folder on Logan's desk, official government seals scattered across the papers like death sentences. "Someone gave them everything, sir. Bank records, recorded phone calls, email chains. They have evidence we thought was buried forever." The blood drained from Logan's face as he flipped through the documents. Every shady deal, every legal corner he'd cut, every regulation he'd bent or broken in his climb to billionaire status. It was all there, laid out in meticulous detail by someone who understood his business better than he did himself. Who? The word came out as a growl. "We don't know. The informant's identity is sealed, but whoever it is has access to information that should have been impossible to obtain." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Sir, this isn't some disgruntled employee or business rival. This is someone with intimate knowledge of our operations, someone who's been planning this for a very long time." Logan's empire, built on ruthless ambition and carefully concealed illegal activities, began crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. By noon, federal agents were boxing up files from his offices. By evening, news vans lined the streets outside his building as reporters shouted questions about fraud investigations and pending indictments. The timing couldn't have been worse. The reality show was at the height of its popularity, millions of viewers tuning in each week to watch Logan systematically destroy his wife's self-worth. Now those same cameras captured his growing desperation as phone calls went unreturned and allies disappeared like smoke in a hurricane. $40 million, Logan said into his phone, pacing his penthouse while Tessa sat silently on the couch, watching him fall apart with the same detached interest she might show a mildly entertaining television program. "That's what I'm asking for as a bridge loan while this gets sorted out." The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. Another door closing, another lifeline being cut. His friend from the country club, the same man who'd laughed and encouraged his cruel bet, suddenly became unavailable. Phone calls went to voicemail. Invitations stopped arriving. The social circle that had celebrated his wedding now treated him like a disease they might catch through proximity. "Maybe you should call your wife's family," Richard Blackstone suggested during one of their last conversations before he too disappeared from Logan's life. "I heard they're quite comfortable down in Alabama." The suggestion was both desperate and insulting, but Logan found himself seriously considering it. Tessa's family had seemed simple, working-class people who would be grateful for any connection to his wealth. Surely they could provide some temporary financial support while he rebuilt. "Tessa," he said one evening after another day of devastating legal developments, "I need to ask you something." She looked up from the book she was reading, her expression politely attentive but emotionally vacant. The vibrant woman who'd spilled champagne on his shirt 6 months earlier had been so thoroughly broken that sometimes Logan wondered if he'd imagined her warmth and spirit entirely. "Your family," he continued, struggling with words that felt like swallowing glass. "Do they have any resources that might help us through this temporary setback?" For just a moment, something flickered behind Tessa's eyes. Not the hurt he'd grown accustomed to seeing, but something sharper, more calculating. "My family," she repeated softly, her Alabama accent suddenly less pronounced than it had been in months. "What kind of resources did you have in mind?" "Money," Logan said bluntly, his desperation overriding his usual manipulation tactics. "Loans, investments, anything that could help stabilize our situation until the government realizes they've made a mistake." Tessa set down her book carefully, folding her hands in her lap with a composure that seemed oddly mature for someone he'd spent months treating like a child. "I'll make some calls," she said finally. "See what I can do." But that night, as Logan lay beside his wife in their king-sized bed that might soon be seized as evidence, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in their relationship. Tessa's breathing was too controlled for sleep, her body too still beside his restless tossing. The investigation intensified over the following weeks. Assets were frozen, business partners fled, and Logan's carefully constructed public image crumbled under the weight of federal scrutiny. The reality show that was supposed to document his triumphant humiliation of an ordinary woman instead captured his increasingly frantic attempts to salvage an empire built on sand. Have you ever watched someone's arrogance catch up with them? What's the most satisfying downfall you've witnessed? The breaking point came when Logan discovered that someone had been systematically transferring his liquid assets to offshore accounts he didn't control, not stealing them. The transactions were all technically legal, but placing them beyond his reach just as he needed them most. "Who has access to these accounts?" he demanded of his remaining financial advisor, a nervous man who kept glancing toward the door as if planning his escape. "Just you and your wife, sir. She's listed as co-signatory on all major holdings as per the prenuptial agreement." Logan's blood turned to ice. He'd insisted on making Tessa co-signatory as part of his show of trust and devotion, never imagining she'd have the intelligence or courage to understand what that meant, let alone use it against him. But as he stared at the financial documents showing millions of dollars moved with surgical precision to accounts in Cayman Islands banks, Logan began to realize that his simple Southern wife might not be as simple as she'd seemed. As FBI agents raided his office, Logan turned to Tessa for comfort, only to find her calmly packing a single suitcase. "Where are you going?" he demanded. Her smile was the first genuine one he'd seen in months. "Home." The word hit him like a physical blow. Not their home. Not his penthouse prison where cameras documented every moment of their performance. Her home. The place she'd come from before he decided to destroy her for sport. "You can't leave me," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "Not now. I need you." Tessa paused in her packing, one hand resting on the designer clothes he'd bought to remake her in his image. When she looked at him, her eyes held no anger, no hurt, no trace of the emotions he'd worked so hard to manipulate. They held pity. "Need me?" she repeated quietly. "The way you needed entertainment? The way you needed someone to break for $50 million. Logan's world tilted sideways. "How do you know about the bet?" Tessa zipped her suitcase, closed with practiced efficiency. "Logan, honey," I've known about the bet since our second week of marriage. I've known about the cameras, the manipulation, the plan to destroy me for your friend's amusement. She stood up, smoothing down the simple black dress he'd criticized just that morning for being too plain, too common, too much like something a woman from her background would wear. The only question, she continued, was how long it would take you to lose everything while I decided what to do about it. As she walked toward their bedroom door, suitcase in hand, Logan realized with growing horror that he'd been playing chess while his opponent had been playing an entirely different game. The woman he'd married to prove love was just another commodity, was about to teach him the difference between being rich and being powerful. She vanished like smoke, leaving behind only designer clothes and a note that made his blood run cold. Thank you for the education. Now school's out. Logan Pierce woke up to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of his penthouse mornings, but the hollow emptiness of a space that had been deliberately vacated. Tessa's side of the bed was cold, sheets pulled tight and pillows arranged with the precision of someone who had no intention of returning. He found the note propped against the bathroom mirror, where she knew he'd see it first thing. Elegant handwriting on expensive stationery, every word chosen with surgical precision. Logan, thank you for the education. You taught me things about power, manipulation, and human nature that I never could have learned in books. Consider our arrangement concluded. The clothes and jewelry are gifts I no longer need. I'm sure you can find another woman eager to wear them. School's out. No signature. No Mrs. Pierce. Just a single letter that somehow contained more dismissal than 1,000 words of anger could have conveyed. Logan's hands shook as he read it again, searching for hidden meaning, for some trace of the broken woman he'd left sleeping beside him 12 hours earlier. This note wasn't written by someone who'd been destroyed. It was written by someone who'd been in control all along. The closet told the story of her departure in devastating detail. Every designer dress he'd bought her hung in perfect rows, tags still attached to most of them. The jewelry he'd lavished on her sat in neat arrangements on the custom velvet display he'd had installed. Thousands of dollars in diamonds and gold abandoned like costume jewelry after a play. She'd taken nothing he'd given her, nothing that connected her to the life he'd built around her, the identity he'd tried to force her to accept. But her personal things, the few items she'd brought from Alabama, the simple clothes she'd worn before he'd decided to remake her, were gone without a trace. The cameras that had documented every moment of their marriage captured Logan's growing panic as he searched their apartment for clues, for some indication of where she might have gone. The footage would later become some of the most watched reality television in history. America's most ruthless businessman reduced to a desperate man, calling his missing wife's phone every 5 minutes. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Her social media accounts had vanished. Her email bounced back as undeliverable. Even her employment records at Mount Sinai Hospital showed no forwarding address, no emergency contact information beyond family members who claimed to have no idea where she'd gone. She hasn't contacted us, Tessa's mother said when Logan finally swallowed his pride and called Alabama. Her voice carried the cool politeness of someone speaking to a stranger. And even if she had, I'm not sure we'd tell you. That girl came home from New York different, Mr. Pierce. Quieter, sadder. Whatever you did to her up there, I hope you're proud of yourself. The line went dead before Logan could explain, could defend himself, could beg for information that might lead him back to the one person who might help him salvage his crumbling empire. Because that's what it had become. Not a search for his beloved wife, but a desperate hunt for the woman who held the keys to his financial salvation. Every frozen account, every seized asset, every legal document bore her co-signature. She wasn't just his wife. She was his business partner, his financial co-conspirator, his only hope of maintaining access to the wealth that defined his entire existence. The federal investigation intensified in her absence. Agents now focused on both Logan's business practices and his missing wife's potential role in their financial arrangements. The questions grew more pointed, more suspicious, as if Tessa's disappearance had somehow changed the entire nature of their inquiry. Where is Mrs. Pierce? Special Agent Davidson asked during Logan's third interrogation session. her voice carrying the patience of someone who already knew more than she was revealing. "I told you I don't know," Logan repeated, his designer suit wrinkled from stress, sweat, and sleepless nights. She left a note and disappeared. With $47 million in jointly held assets, she didn't steal anything. The words felt strange in Logan's mouth, defending the woman he'd spent months systematically destroying. "The money is in accounts we both control legally." "Legally, yes, but ethically." Agent Davidson leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the intensity of someone closing in on their prey. "Mr. Pierce, did you ever consider that your wife might have had her own reasons for marrying you? Her own agenda?" The question hit Logan like a physical blow. In all his planning, all his strategic manipulation, he'd never once considered that Tessa might be playing a game of her own. She'd seemed so innocent, so grateful, so perfectly vulnerable to his sophisticated predator tactics. But innocence didn't make $47 million disappear overnight. Gratitude didn't erase digital footprints so completely that federal investigators couldn't trace them. Vulnerability didn't coordinate an escape so precise that it left no trails to follow. "Who is she?" Logan whispered, more to himself than to the agent across from him. "That's what we're trying to figure out," Agent Davidson replied. "Because the woman you married, Tessa Brooks of Birmingham, Alabama, that person didn't exist before 2 years ago." Logan's world tilted again, reality shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. "That's impossible." Birth certificate filed retroactively. Employment history that doesn't quite line up with Social Security records. References who remember her clearly, but can't provide documentation of their relationships. Agent Davidson spread photographs across the metal table between them, surveillance shots of Tessa at various locations. Always alone, always moving with purpose. "Your wife, Mr. Pierce, is either the most thoroughly documented fraud we've ever encountered, or she's someone with resources sophisticated enough to create a completely convincing false identity." The surveillance footage from Austin showed a woman in designer clothes stepping from a private jet, flanked by bodyguards. Logan stared at the screen in disbelief. It looked like Tessa, but moved with the confidence of someone who owned the world. The woman in the grainy security video walked with her shoulders back, her head high, every step deliberate and assured. She wore clothes that fit her perfectly, moved with the unconscious grace of someone accustomed to luxury, and carried herself with an authority that made the bodyguards flanking her seem like accessories rather than protection. It was Tessa's face, Tessa's body, but it wasn't the broken woman he'd left in their bed. This was someone else entirely, someone who belonged in boardrooms and executive suites, someone who commanded rather than obeyed. "When was this taken?" Logan's voice came out hoarse. "Yesterday," Agent Davidson said. 6 hours after she walked out of your apartment." Logan studied the timestamp, the location data, the crisp quality of footage that suggested expensive equipment and professional surveillance. Someone had been watching his wife, watching them both, with resources that rivaled his own. If someone humiliated you publicly, would you disappear quietly or fight back loudly? What's your revenge style? The reality began settling around him like cement. His broken, grateful Southern wife had never existed. The woman he'd married, manipulated, and systematically destroyed was someone else entirely. Someone with the power to make herself disappear and reappear at will. Someone with access to private jets and professional security. Someone who'd been playing a game so sophisticated that he'd never even realized he was a pawn. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Some lessons are more expensive than others. Logan tried calling the number immediately, but like everything else connected to Tessa, it had already ceased to exist by the time he pressed send. She was gone, vanished as completely as if she'd never been real at all. But the hole she'd left in his life, and in his bank accounts, was devastatingly, permanently real. The hunt was about to begin, but Logan was beginning to suspect that he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey, and his predator had just revealed that she'd been stalking him all along. The boardroom fell silent as she walked in, not as broken Tessa from Alabama, but as Teresa Beaumont, heiress to an empire that made his fortune look like pocket change. The Beaumont Industries building rose 47 floors above downtown Austin, its glass and steel facade reflecting the Texas sky like a mirror designed to blind those foolish enough to look too closely at real power. Logan Pierce stood on the sidewalk below, staring up at a corporate logo he'd never heard of until 3 days ago, when his private investigator had finally traced his missing wife to this address. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Marcus asked nervously, adjusting his tie for the 10th time since they'd arrived. Logan's remaining assistant had aged 5 years in the past month, stress etching new lines around his eyes as he watched his boss's empire collapse in real time. "She's my wife," Logan said, though the words felt increasingly meaningless. "Whatever game she's playing, we need to understand it." The lobby was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Marble floors that whispered wealth instead of screaming it. Art that belonged to museums mounted on walls that probably cost more than Logan's penthouse. The receptionist, a poised woman in her 30s, looked up as they approached with the kind of professional smile that said she knew exactly who they were and had been expecting them. "Mr. Pierce," she said before Logan could introduce himself. "Ms. Beaumont is waiting for you in the executive conference room, 47th floor. The elevator is programmed to take you directly there." The ride up gave Logan 47 floors to prepare for whatever waited at the top. But when the elevator doors opened directly into a conference room that commanded a panoramic view of Austin, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. Tessa sat at the head of a table that could seat 20, but she wasn't the broken woman who'd serve him sweet tea while he mocked her accent. This woman wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the designer dresses he'd bought to remake her. Her hair was pulled back in a style that suggested authority rather than submission. Her posture radiated the kind of confidence that money alone couldn't buy. The confidence of someone born to power, raised to command, bred to win. But it was her eyes that stopped Logan cold. Gone was the hurt, the desperate need for approval, the grateful submission that had made her such perfect prey. These eyes belonged to a predator, cold and calculating and completely in control. "Hello, Logan," she said, and even her voice was different. The careful Alabama drawl replaced by crisp diction that suggested expensive private schools and Ivy League education. "Please sit down." Logan remained standing, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the wife he thought he'd broken. "Who are you?" "I'm exactly who I've always been," she replied, gesturing to the chair across from her with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The question is whether you're ready to learn who that is." The wall behind her lit up with a presentation that made Logan's blood run cold. Financial charts showing the growth of Beaumont Industries over the past century. Oil fields stretching across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Refineries, pipelines, shipping contracts worth billions of dollars. Real estate holdings that spanned 3 continents. Investment portfolios that made his own wealth look like pocket change. Beaumont Industries. Tessa, no, Teresa, continued in a voice that belonged in boardrooms and courtrooms, was founded by my great-great-grandfather in 1897. We've been quietly building an empire while families like yours make noise about their new money. The numbers on the screen were staggering. Annual revenues in the hundreds of billions. Asset holdings that would make sovereign nations jealous. A corporate structure so complex and far-reaching that Logan realized he was looking at one of the most powerful private entities in the world. "This is impossible," he whispered. "What's impossible is that you never bothered to research the woman you married," Teresa replied with a smile that held no warmth. "You were so focused on finding the perfect victim that you never considered you might be the one being hunted." The presentation shifted to show Logan himself. His corporate history, his financial holdings, his business practices. But these weren't the sanitized reports he was used to seeing. These files contained everything. Every illegal deal, every regulatory violation, every corner he'd cut in his climb to the top. "We've been watching you for 3 years, Teresa said casually, as if discussing the weather. "My analysts identified you as someone who represented everything wrong with the new American elite. Ruthless, soulless, willing to destroy anything and anyone for personal gain. Logan's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair she'd indicated, his mind reeling as the implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. "The bet," he said weakly, "was perfect for my purposes," she confirmed. "When my sources told me about your cruel little wager, I knew I had the perfect opportunity to get close to you. All I had to do was play the role you expected. The grateful, simple Southern girl who would be easy to manipulate and destroy." The woman he'd thought he was breaking had been breaking him instead, piece by carefully orchestrated piece. Every moment of submission had been calculated. Every tear had been performance. Every night she'd lain beside him, letting him think he was winning. She'd been executing a plan that made his crude manipulation look like a child's game. "But why?" Logan asked, his voice barely audible. Teresa's expression softened slightly, and for just a moment, he glimpsed something that might have been genuine emotion. "Because men like you need to be stopped," she said simply. "Because your bet wasn't just about proving love was a commodity. It was about proving that women like me, women you see as beneath you, don't deserve dignity or respect. You wanted to demonstrate that power gives you the right to destroy anyone you consider disposable." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into his with an intensity that made him want to look away. "So, I decided to demonstrate something else. That real power isn't about breaking people. It's about having the patience to let them break themselves. The federal investigation, the frozen accounts, the systematic destruction of his empire, it had all been her. Not revenge, but justice delivered with surgical precision by someone who understood power in ways he'd never imagined. Have you ever completely misjudged someone's background or capabilities? How did that change your perspective on appearances?" "The money," Logan said desperately. "Our joint accounts were transferred to holding companies controlled by Beaumont Industries," Teresa finished. "Every dollar you thought you'd lost is exactly where it's always been, in my family's portfolio. You've been managing my money all along, Logan. You just didn't know it. The cruelest revelation was still to come." Logan's entire fortune, the empire he'd built through ruthless ambition and illegal tactics, had been funded by the very woman he'd tried to destroy. Every major deal, every leveraged buyout, every regulatory victory, it had all been possible because Teresa Beaumont's family had been pulling strings behind the scenes. "Why?" he asked again, the word coming out as a broken whisper. "Because sometimes the only way to teach a predator is to show him what it feels like to be prey," she said, standing up with the fluid grace of someone born to command. "You wanted to prove that love was just another commodity. I wanted to prove that arrogance has a price." At the press conference, one reporter asked the question that made Logan's knees buckle. "Ms. Beaumont, was your marriage always part of a larger business strategy?" Her pause before answering lasted an eternity. "My marriage," she said carefully, "was an education for both of us. Some lessons are more expensive than others." As Logan sat in that conference room, surrounded by evidence of wealth and power that dwarfed his own, he finally understood that he'd never been playing in the major leagues at all. He'd been a minor league player who'd gotten lucky, until the day he decided to challenge someone who owned the entire sport. The game was over. He just never realized he'd already lost. Karma wore designer suits and spoke with perfect diction. Everything he tried to teach her, she'd known all along. Logan's penthouse was gone. The yacht, the cars, the private jet, all seized by federal agents who left behind only debt and shame. He sat in a cramped studio apartment in Queens, watching his former wife on every news channel in America. Teresa Beaumont, not Tessa Brooks, stood behind a mahogany podium addressing reporters with the poise of someone born to command attention. Her Alabama accent had vanished, replaced by the polished tones of elite boarding schools. "The Beaumont Foundation is pleased to announce the acquisition of Pierce Industries' remaining assets," she said, her green eyes cold as winter. "We'll be converting the Manhattan headquarters into affordable housing for healthcare workers." Logan's beer bottle slipped from his numb fingers, shattering on cheap linoleum. Healthcare workers. She was mocking him, using his own cruelty as the blade for his destruction. His phone buzzed with another death threat from investors who'd lost millions when his empire collapsed. The FBI had found years of financial crimes, handed to them by someone with inside access. Someone who'd watched him work, learned his methods, documented his illegal moves. Someone who'd shared his bed while planning his downfall. The doorbell rang. Logan opened it to find Marcus, his former best friend and golf partner, holding an envelope. "She wants to see you," Marcus said, avoiding eye contact. "One meeting. Tomorrow night. You're working for her now?" Logan's voice cracked with betrayal. Marcus shrugged. "She pays better, and she doesn't treat people like garbage for entertainment." The meeting location made Logan's stomach twist. A truck stop diner in the middle of nowhere, Texas. The same kind of place he'd mocked during those awful months when he'd tried to break her spirit on camera. Have you ever realized too late that you'd completely misjudged someone? That moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down? Tell me about it in the comments. Logan rented a beat-up Honda with his last credit card and drove 18 hours straight, surviving on gas station coffee and regret. The desert highway stretched endlessly, giving him too much time to remember the look in Teresa's eyes during their last real conversation. She'd asked him once, in a rare moment without cameras, if he'd ever truly loved anyone. He'd laughed and said love was for people too weak to take what they wanted. The memory now felt like swallowing broken glass. The diner sat under flickering neon signs, surrounded by 18-wheelers and dust. Logan parked between a pickup truck and a motorcycle, feeling more out of place than he had at his own wedding. She was waiting in a corner booth, dressed in jeans and a simple white t-shirt. For a moment, his heart stopped. She looked exactly like the woman he'd married, soft, approachable, real. But when she lifted her eyes, the illusion shattered. "Hello, Logan." Her voice carried no warmth, no trace of the nervous girl who used to stumble over his name. "Thank you for coming." He slid into the opposite seat, his hands shaking as he reached for the coffee mug she'd ordered for him. Black, no sugar. She remembered how he liked it. Teresa. The name felt foreign on his tongue. "Or should I call you Tessa?" "My family calls me Tessa. You can use whatever makes you comfortable." She sipped her own coffee with steady hands. "I have a proposition for you." Logan's breath caught. After everything he'd done, she was offering him a lifeline. "I can restore your financial accounts, clear your legal troubles, give you back a version of the life you had." Her fingers traced the rim of her mug. "But there's a price." "Name it." She leaned forward, and for the first time since entering the diner, he saw a flicker of the woman he'd shared a bed with. The woman whose soft sighs had driven him crazy during those early weeks of marriage. "I want what I never had with you," she said quietly. "A real marriage." Logan blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What? No cameras? No games? No lies? Just us figuring out if there's anything worth saving underneath all the damage we've done to each other." Her green eyes searched his face. "You want a life back? Then give me the one thing you never did. Honesty." The coffee turned bitter in his mouth. "Why would you want that? After everything I put you through?" For the first time, her mask slipped completely. Pain flashed across her features, raw and real and devastating. "Because despite everything you did to me, Logan Pierce, I fell in love with glimpses of the man you could have been." Her voice broke slightly, "And I need to know if that man actually exists or if I've been chasing a ghost." In a truck stop diner off a Texas highway, a billionaire heiress and her ruined husband sat across from each other, negotiating the price of forgiveness. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, casting red light across Teresa's face. Logan studied her features, searching for traces of the woman he'd married. She was there, buried beneath layers of calculated control and justified anger. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked, wrapping his hand around the warm coffee mug to stop them from trembling. "Full restoration. Clean slate with the FBI. My lawyers have already negotiated your immunity in exchange for testimony against your former business partners." She pulled out a tablet, scrolling through documents. "Your trust fund will be unfrozen. You'll have enough to live comfortably, though nothing close to your previous wealth." Logan's heart pounded. "And what do you get out of this?" A chance to find out if the man who held me after nightmares was real or just another performance. Her voice stayed level, but her knuckles whitened around her cup. 18 months, Logan. A cabin in Montana where nobody knows our names. No staff, no cameras, no outside world. You want to play house with the man who humiliated you on national television? Her laugh held no humor. I want to discover whether Logan Pierce is capable of genuine change, or if he's just a predator in an expensive suit. The diner's other customers paid them no attention. Truckers focused on their meals, a tired waitress refilling coffee cups. In this ordinary place, they were just another couple having an intense conversation. Why Montana? Logan asked. My grandfather left me a ranch there. 20,000 acres of nothing but mountains and sky. For the first time, her expression softened. It's where I went to heal after you broke me. The words hit like physical blows. Logan had convinced himself that Teresa, had emerged from their marriage unscathed, that her transformation into a powerful heiress meant his cruelty hadn't touched her. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone destroyed your sense of self-worth? How did you find the strength to become whole again? Share your story below. I don't understand, he said. You had this plan from the beginning. The revenge, the takedown of my company. No, she shook her head firmly. Meeting you was an accident. Falling for your initial charm was real. Even after I discovered the bet, I hoped. She trailed off, staring out the window at the dark highway. I hoped you'd choose me over the game. Logan remembered finding her crying in their walk-in closet after a particularly brutal filming session. He'd been annoyed by her tears, seeing them as weakness rather than a natural response to psychological torture. When did you decide to destroy me? The night you laughed about my pathetic gratitude with the producers. Her green eyes met his across the table. That's when I remembered who I really was. Not some small-town girl lucky to catch a rich man's attention, but Teresa Beaumont, whose family built empires while yours was still dirt farming in Ireland. The casual revelation of his family's humble origins stung. He'd spent years crafting his image as old money elite. You investigated my background. I investigated everything. Your father's gambling debts, your mother's pill addiction, the student loans you're still paying off. She leaned back in the booth. Did you really think I'd marry someone without knowing exactly who I was dealing with? Logan felt naked under her scrutiny. Every secret, every shame, every carefully hidden vulnerability, she knew it all. So what now? You've won. I'm broke, humiliated, completely at your mercy. He tried to inject some of his old arrogance into the words, but they came out sounding defeated. What's the real price for my freedom? Teresa was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The price is becoming the man I glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments. The one who brought me tea when I was sick, who held me during thunderstorms without expecting anything in return. She reached across the table, her fingers barely touching his. The man who made me believe that underneath all the games, you might actually care. Her touch sent electricity through his skin. Even now, after everything, he wanted her with an intensity that terrified him. And if I can't be that man, then you'll have 18 months of comfort before I walk away forever. Her hand withdrew, leaving his skin cold. But if you can change, if you can love me the way I deserve from the beginning. She paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. Then maybe we can build something real. Logan stared at her across the table. The most powerful woman in America was offering him a second chance at the only thing he'd never been able to buy or steal, genuine love. When do we leave? He asked. Her smile was small but real. Tomorrow morning. And Logan, she stood up, throwing $20 on the table. Bring only what fits in one suitcase. Where we're going, designer labels don't matter. As she walked away, her hips swaying in worn denim, Logan realized he'd never wanted anything more in his life than the chance to prove he was worth a forgiveness. They moved to a farmhouse in Montana where nobody knew their names. Two wounded souls trying to build something real from the ashes of their public destruction. The ranch house sat in a valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains, miles from the nearest neighbor. Logan stood on the wraparound porch, breathing air so clean it hurt his city lungs, watching Tessa, he was learning to call her again, feed chickens in the yard. She wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, no designer clothes, no cameras recording her every move. This was the woman he'd married, stripped of all pretense. "The nearest town is 40 minutes away," she said, walking back toward the house. "No internet, no cell service, just us and the land." Logan nodded, still adjusting to the silence. After years of constant noise, traffic, meetings, the buzz of electronic devices, the quiet felt overwhelming. Their first weeks were awkward, like strangers learning to share space. They maintained separate bedrooms, separate routines, separate worlds within the same four walls. Tessa worked in the garden and read books by the fireplace. Logan chopped wood and tried to remember how to exist without constant stimulation. The physical attraction never faded. He'd catch her stretching in the morning sun and feel his body respond with embarrassing intensity. She'd watch him work without his shirt, her eyes following the movement of his muscles, and he'd see the flush creep up her neck. But neither made the first move. 2. "I've been thinking about that first night we met," Tessa said one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "You asked me what I wanted most in life." Logan remembered. She'd said something about helping people, about making a difference. He found it naive and endearing. "I lied," she continued. "I wanted someone to see me. Really see me. Not what they expected me to be." She glanced at him sideways. "What about you? What did you really want?" The honest answer surprised him. To matter. To be more than just another rich man's disappointing son. Have you ever felt invisible despite being surrounded by people? Like nobody really understood who you were underneath the surface? Tell me about it in the comments. They began talking, really talking, for the first time in their relationship. About childhoods shaped by different kinds of pressure. About the loneliness of never being seen for who they truly were. About dreams they'd buried under expectations and fear. "I used to want to be a teacher," Logan admitted one night as they sat by the fire. "5th grade. Help kids who felt as lost as I did." Tessa looked up from her book, genuinely surprised. "What stopped you?" "My father said teaching was for people who couldn't make real money." Logan poked at the logs with an iron rod. Maybe he was right. Or maybe he was a man who measured worth in dollars instead of lives changed. She set down her book completely. "It's not too late, you know, to become who you wanted to be." The conversation continued past midnight, voices soft in the firelit room. Logan found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. His fear of failure, his desperate need for approval, the way his father's disappointment had shaped every decision he'd ever made. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "for everything I did to you. The cameras, the mockery, the way I try to break your spirit for entertainment." His voice cracked. "You deserved so much better." Tessa was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, tears glittered in her eyes. "I forgave you months ago, Logan. The question is whether you can forgive yourself enough to become someone worth loving." That night, she came to his room, not for sex, but to sleep curled against his chest, her breathing steady and trusting. Logan lay awake for hours, overwhelmed by the privilege of holding her without agenda or performance. The physical intimacy returned gradually. A kiss while washing dishes, her hand in his during evening walks. The night she straddled his lap on the couch, her mouth hungry against his, both of them desperate to reconnect without the poison of their past. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her neck as she unbuttoned his shirt with trembling fingers. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed. And for the first time in their relationship, making love felt like worship instead of conquest. Spring arrived with wildflowers and baby animals, and Logan discovered he had a talent for fixing things. Broken fences, leaky pipes, the antique tractor that hadn't run in years. Working with his hands felt more satisfying than any business deal ever had. "You're different here," Tessa observed, watching him repair the chicken coop with tools he'd never touched before their arrival. "Calmer, more yourself." "Maybe this is who I was supposed to be all along," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Before I got twisted up in trying to prove I was worth something." She walked over and kissed him, tasting salt and satisfaction on his lips. "You were always worth something, Logan. You just needed to remember. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Tessa made a confession that changed everything. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. 6 weeks. Logan's world tilted. A baby. Their baby. Created in this place of healing and honesty, far from the toxic circus of their public life. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, hardly daring to breathe. Her smile was radiant in the starlight. Terrified, happy, hopeful. She looked at him with eyes that held no trace of their painful history. "How do you feel about becoming a father?" Logan pulled her close, his heart pounding with joy and responsibility and love so fierce it took his breath away. "Like maybe I finally understand what I was put on this earth to do." She held his future in her hands, literally, as the ultrasound showed their child's heartbeat, and had to decide if love was worth the risk of trusting him again. The small-town doctor's office in Glacier Ridge felt like a different universe from the exclusive Manhattan medical suites where Logan used to get his annual checkups. Cracked linoleum floors, outdated magazines, and a receptionist who called everyone honey without irony. "There's your baby, Dr. Martinez said, pointing to a tiny flickering spot on the grainy black and white screen. Heartbeat looks strong. Due date appears to be early March. Logan squeezed Tessa's hand so tightly she had to whisper for him to ease up. His eyes were fixed on the monitor with the intensity of someone seeing a miracle for the first time. "Can you print extra copies?" Tessa asked. "For the grandparents?" The word grandparents hit Logan like a physical blow. His parents, who'd written him off as a failure after his public disgrace. Tessa's family, who'd probably celebrate the news of their grandchild while still hating their son-in-law. "We need to talk about going public," Tessa said during the drive home through winding mountain roads. "The pregnancy won't stay secret forever." Logan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Are you ready for that circus again? The cameras, the questions, the judgment. I'm not the same person who ran from cameras before." Her voice carried quiet strength. "But I need to know you won't revert to who you were when the spotlight finds us." The question haunted him. In their isolated bubble, being a better man felt possible, even natural. But fame and pressure had always brought out his worst instincts. "What if I disappoint you again?" The admission came out raw and scared. "Then our child grows up knowing that at least one parent chooses love over ego every single day." She turned to face him fully. "Logan, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be present." That night, Logan called his parents for the first time in 8 months. His mother cried when he told her about the baby. His father, predictably, launched into a lecture about responsibility and second chances. "Don't screw this up, son," were his father's last words before hanging up. Some mistakes can't be undone. Tessa's phone call to her family went differently. Logan listened from the kitchen as she spoke to her grandmother in a mix of English and what sounded like French, laughing at something the older woman said. "Grandmere wants to know if you'll teach the baby to ride horses," she called out to him. "Does she still hate me?" Logan asked when Tessa joined him in the kitchen. "She says you're either the biggest fool who ever lived or the luckiest." Tessa wrapped her arms around his waist. "She's reserving judgment until she meets this version of you. Do you think people deserve second chances when a child is involved? How do you balance protecting your kids with giving their other parent room to grow? Share your thoughts." The outside world found them 3 weeks later. Logan was fixing the roof when he spotted the telephoto lens glinting from the tree line. Paparazzi had tracked them down. "They're here," he told Tessa, climbing down from the ladder with deliberately slow movements. "At least 6 photographers in the woods." Instead of panic, Tessa's face set with determination. "Then we control the narrative. One interview, our terms, before they turn this into a feeding frenzy." They chose a respected journalist, known for thoughtful celebrity profiles. The interview took place on their front porch, with mountains providing the backdrop and their obvious contentment speaking louder than words. "The Logan Pierce who made that bet doesn't exist anymore," Logan told the reporter. "I had to lose everything to find out who I really was underneath all the performance and posturing. And you, Ms. Beaumont, do you trust this transformation?" Tessa's hand moved unconsciously to her barely visible bump. I trust the man who gets up every morning to feed chickens and fix fences without complaining. The one who reads pregnancy books and practices installing car seats. She looked at Logan with eyes full of love. The man who's more excited about becoming a father than he ever was about closing business deals. When the interview aired, social media exploded. Half the comments accused Tessa of being a fool for trusting Logan again. The other half celebrated their love story as proof that people could change. America's divided, Logan said, scrolling through reactions on his phone. They either think you're crazy or we're the greatest comeback story ever told. What do you think? Tessa asked, settling beside him on the couch with her head on his shoulder. Logan set the phone aside and pulled her closer, his hand resting on the small curve where their child grew. I think I don't care what anyone else believes as long as you still believe in us. Their quiet life became less quiet as pregnancy progressed. Tessa's family visited, cautiously welcoming Logan while making it clear they'd be watching his every move. His parents came for an awkward weekend where his mother fussed over Tessa and his father interrogated Logan about his plans for supporting a family. He's different. Logan overheard his mother telling his father. Calmer, like he finally knows who he's supposed to be. People don't change that much, his father replied, but his tone held less certainty than his words. The real test came when Tessa went into labor 6 weeks early during a February blizzard. With roads impassable and the nearest hospital 40 minutes away, Logan found himself delivering their daughter with only Dr. Martinez's voice on the phone to guide him. I can see her head, he told Tessa, his hand shaking but his voice steady. She's beautiful, just like her mama. Baby Charlotte entered the world screaming, tiny but fierce, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. As Logan placed their daughter on Tessa's chest, he realized he'd never felt fear and love so intensely at the same time. She's perfect, Tessa whispered, tears streaming down her face. Look what we made, Logan. Look what love can create. Holding his daughter for the first time, Logan understood that some transformations are permanent. Charlotte would grow up knowing a father who chose her and her mother over everything else the world had to offer. And for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. They returned to the spotlight not as predator and prey, but as partners who'd learned that real love requires losing the games and winning each other's trust. Charlotte was 3 months old when they made their first public appearance together. Not at a gala or business function, but at a children's hospital in Denver where Tessa had arranged for the Beaumont Foundation to fund a new pediatric wing. Logan carried Charlotte in a baby sling, looking nothing like the polished businessman who'd once terrorized boardrooms. His hair was longer, his clothes simpler, his smile genuine as he watched Tessa cut the ribbon, surrounded by young patients and their families. Mr. Pierce, a reporter called out. How does it feel to be back in the public eye? Terrifying, Logan answered honestly, earning surprised laughter from the crowd. But some things are more important than comfort. My wife is changing lives here, and I want our daughter to grow up knowing her parents use their resources to help people, not hurt them. The clip went viral within hours. #DaddyLogan trended on social media as people shared photos of him bottle-feeding Charlotte during the hospital tour, his expression soft with wonder as she gripped his finger. Look at him, one comment read. That's not performance. That's a man completely in love with his little girl. But not everyone was convinced. A competing network aired a scathing expose titled, Can a Predator Really Change? Featuring interviews with Logan's former business partners and psychological experts debating whether his transformation was genuine. I've seen this pattern before, Dr. Patricia Webb, a relationship expert, told the cameras. Manipulative men often use pregnancy and children as tools to maintain control over their victims. We should be asking whether Teresa Beaumont is truly safe or if she's trapped in a more sophisticated version of the same cage. The criticism hurt more than Logan expected. Late at night, feeding Charlotte while Tessa slept, he wondered if the experts were right. Maybe his change was just another performance, more subtle but equally manipulative. You're thinking too loud, Tessa said, appearing in the nursery doorway in her pajamas. She can sense when you're anxious. Dr. Webb might be right, Logan said, carefully transferring Charlotte to her crib. What if I'm still just playing games, but now I've convinced myself they're real? Tessa studied his face in the soft glow of the nightlight. Do you know what convinced me you'd really changed? What? The night Charlotte was born, when you were terrified but stayed calm anyway, when you put her needs above your fear. She moved closer, her hand resting on his chest. A performer would have cracked under that pressure. A father rises to meet it. What do you think? Can someone who hurt you deeply ever truly change? Or should you always be watching for signs they'll revert to old patterns? Tell me your experience in the comments. Their next major public appearance was the Second Chances Benefit Gala in New York. Tessa's idea to support programs for incarcerated individuals seeking redemption. Logan was terrified to return to the city where his empire had crumbled, but Tessa insisted they face their past together. The ballroom buzzed with tension when they arrived. Some guests whispered behind champagne glasses, while others approached with genuine warmth. Charlotte, now 6 months old and impossibly charming, drew crowds of admirers who seemed to forget her parents' controversial history. Logan Pierce, a familiar voice, said behind him. Marcus, his former best friend, stood awkwardly with his wife. Congratulations on the baby. She's beautiful. Thank you. Logan shifted Charlotte to one arm, uncertain whether to extend his hand. How are things? Good? Better? Marcus glanced around nervously. Listen, I owe you an apology. The way we all dropped you when things got bad, it wasn't right. You don't owe me anything. I earned every bit of isolation I got. Maybe, but friendship should mean something more than fair weather support. Marcus finally met his eyes. If you ever want to grab coffee, talk things through, I'm around. The conversation was interrupted by Tessa's speech. She took the podium with Charlotte babbling happily in her arms, addressing the crowd with the poise that had made her a formidable heiress. Second chances aren't given, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. They're earned. My husband and I are living proof that people can change when they're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. She looked directly at Logan, love shining in her eyes. But change isn't a destination. It's a choice you make every single day. To choose love over pride, growth over comfort, service over selfishness. The speech earned a standing ovation, but the real test came during the question and answer session that followed. Ms. Beaumont, a journalist, called out, "Aren't you concerned about raising a daughter with someone who publicly humiliated women for entertainment?" The ballroom fell silent. Logan's stomach dropped, but Tessa's expression remained serene. "I'm raising a daughter with a man who learned that his worst behavior came from his own pain and insecurity," she replied calmly. Charlotte will grow up watching her father treat her mother with respect, seeing daily examples of what healthy masculinity looks like. She'll know that mistakes don't define you, but how you handle them does. Logan felt tears prick his eyes. Even now, Tessa defended him with grace he didn't deserve. "And you, Mr. Pierce?" another reporter pressed. "What do you say to people who think this is all an elaborate act?" Logan stood slowly, Charlotte reaching for him with tiny hands. The room held its breath as he approached the microphone. "I say watch your daughter grow up," he said simply. "Watch how we treat each other when we think nobody's looking. Judge us by our actions over years, not months." He paused, looking out at the sea of skeptical faces. "I can't prove I've changed with words, but I can show you with the life I build with my family." The honesty in his voice seemed to reach even the harshest critics. Several people nodded, and Logan saw more than one person wiping their eyes. As they left the gala that night, Tessa squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you. That couldn't have been easy. It was terrifying," Logan admitted. "But you're right. Some things are more important than being comfortable." Charlotte chose that moment to spit up on his expensive suit jacket, earning laughs from nearby photographers who'd been following them to their car. "There's tomorrow's headline," Tessa said with amusement. "Logan Pierce, destroyed by baby drool." Logan looked down at his ruined jacket and his perfect daughter and his incredible wife, and realized he'd never been happier to be completely out of control. In the delivery room where life began again, she realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemy. It's transforming them into the person worthy of your love. 2 years later, Logan stood in the same hospital where Charlotte had been born, this time under very different circumstances. Tessa was in labor with her second child, and the blizzard raging outside felt like a cosmic reminder of how far they'd traveled from those desperate early days. "Remember when you delivered Charlotte?" Tessa panted through a contraction, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes bright with anticipation. "How could I forget? You nearly broke my hand." Logan smoothed her hair back, marveling at her strength. "This time we have actual medical professionals." "Less dramatic," she agreed, then groaned as another wave hit. "But somehow scarier." Logan understood. Charlotte's birth had been about survival, proving they could handle crisis together. This pregnancy represented something bigger, their conscious choice to expand the family they'd built from the ashes of mutual destruction. Dr. Martinez bustled in, the same physician who'd guided Charlotte's emergency delivery over a phone line. "How are we doing, Mama?" "Ready to meet our son," Tessa said, bearing down with fierce determination. James Logan Pierce entered the world just after midnight, screaming with the same outraged dignity his sister had shown. But where Charlotte had been born into uncertainty, James arrived surrounded by love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. "He looks like you," Tessa whispered as Logan held their son for the first time. Same stubborn expression. "Poor kid." Logan traced James's tiny features with one finger. "At least he got your heart." The next morning brought visitors. Charlotte toddled into the room, clutching her grandmother's hand, her dark curls bouncing as she climbed onto the hospital bed to meet her brother. "Baby," she announced proudly, as if she'd personally arranged his arrival. "That's right, sweetheart. This is James." Tessa guided Charlotte's small hand to touch the baby's cheek. "You're going to be the best big sister." Logan's parents arrived next, his mother immediately taking charge of Charlotte, while his father stood awkwardly by the window, still uncertain how to navigate their relationship's new dynamics. "He's a handsome boy," his father finally said, approaching the bed with hesitant steps. "Looks strong. Want to hold him?" Logan offered, surprising everyone, including himself. His father's face transformed as James was placed in his arms. The stern businessman who'd spent Logan's childhood demanding perfection melted into a grandfather, making silly faces at his grandson. "I was too hard on you," his father said quietly, his eyes still fixed on James. "Always pushing, never satisfied. I didn't want you to settle for ordinary, but I forgot to teach you that being extraordinary doesn't mean being cruel." The apology Logan had waited his whole life to hear came whispered over his sleeping son, and somehow that made it perfect. Tessa's family filled the room next, her grandmother, her parents, aunts and uncles who'd flown in from Louisiana and Texas. James was passed from arms to arms, welcomed with the joy of a dynasty that understood the power of new beginnings. "Grandmere approves," Tessa's grandmother announced in her heavily accented English, studying James with the intensity of someone reading tea leaves. "This one will be trouble, but the good kind. The kind that changes the world." Have you ever experienced a moment where you realize your family's love had grown stronger after surviving something that could have destroyed it? Share those stories. They give the rest of us hope. The media attention was gentler this time. America had watched Logan's transformation over 2 years, seen him grow from reviled villain to devoted father. The headlines now read, "Pierce family welcomes baby number 2, instead of disgraced tycoon's wife gives birth." "Look at this." Tessa showed him a magazine article featuring photos from James's birth. "They used a picture of you crying when you first held him." Logan studied the image, his face wet with tears, his expression raw with love and wonder. 2 years ago, showing such vulnerability would have felt like weakness. Now it felt like truth. "Good," he said, kissing the top of her head as she nursed James. "Let them see what real strength looks like." Their life settled into the beautiful chaos of raising 2 small children. Logan had started teaching part-time at the local elementary school, finally pursuing the childhood dream his father had dismissed. Watching him read stories to first graders, seeing how naturally he connected with kids who needed extra attention. Tessa felt her heart swell with pride for the man he'd become. Mr. Pierce, one of his students asked during a parent-teacher conference, "Why did you used to be mean to people?" The question came from 7-year-old Emma, whose own father had left when she was 4. Logan knelt to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Because I was hurt inside and didn't know how to make it better," he said honestly. "When people are in pain, sometimes they try to make other people hurt too. But that never actually helps. It just spreads more pain around. Like when I'm sad and I'm mean to my little brother. Exactly like that. The difference is, you're 7 and you're still learning. I was a grown-up who should have known better." Logan smiled gently. "That's why it's so important to say you're sorry when you hurt someone, and then work really hard to be kinder next time." Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised him with a tight hug. "I'm glad you learned to be nice, Mr. Pierce. You're my favorite teacher." These moments, small interactions with children who saw him only as someone who cared about their education, reminded Logan daily why the hard work of change had been worth it. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Logan and Tessa renewed their vows in the same Montana valley where they'd learned to love each other honestly. This time, Charlotte scattered flower petals while James slept in his grandmother's arms, and their friends and family witnessed promises made without cameras or contracts. "I take you, Tessa, not as the prize I thought I'd won, but as the partner I'm grateful to deserve," Logan said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I promise to choose you and our children every day to be the man worthy of the love you've given me." "I take you, Logan, not as the project I hoped to fix, but as the man who chose to fix himself," Tessa replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "I promise to believe in your goodness even when you forget it yourself, and to build with you a love our children will want to find for themselves someday." The ceremony was simple, real, perfect, as they kissed to seal their renewed commitment. Logan realized that somewhere along the way, his need to prove himself to the world had transformed into a desire to be worthy of the family sleeping peacefully in his arms each night. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching Charlotte chase fireflies while James dozed against his father's chest, a reporter called for one final interview. "Any regrets about the path that brought you here?" the journalist asked. Logan and Tessa exchanged a look that held years of pain, growth, forgiveness, and hard-won joy. "I regret the pain I caused," Logan said carefully. "But I can't regret the journey that led to this moment. Every mistake taught me something I needed to know to become the husband and father they deserve." "And you, Mrs. Pierce? Any advice for people facing betrayal in their own relationships?" Tessa adjusted James in her arms, watching Charlotte's delighted squeals as she caught another firefly. "Trust your instincts about whether someone is genuinely changing or just getting better at hiding who they are," she said. "Real transformation shows up in small, daily choices, in how they treat service workers, how they handle stress, whether they take responsibility without making excuses." She looked at Logan with eyes full of love. "And remember, you can't change someone else. You can only decide if you want to grow alongside them when they choose to change themselves." As the interview ended and their children fell asleep, Logan and Tessa sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge over the mountains that had witnessed their rebirth. "So what would you have done in Tessa's position?" Logan asked, echoing the question that had launched their story years ago. "Would you have sought revenge or chosen forgiveness?" Tessa smiled, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I would have done exactly what I did. Remembered that the most powerful transformation happens not when we defeat our enemies, but when we help them become worthy of our love." If this story of revenge, redemption, and real love moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales that prove even the most broken relationships can heal when both people commit to change. What's your take on second chances? Drop your thoughts below. And remember, the most powerful transformation happens not when we defeat our enemies, but when we help them become worthy of our love.